Peleliu Island, September 1944, 10:42 a.m. The jungle is silent. So silent it feels alive. Heat ripples over the coral ridges. Flies circle over the dead. U.S. Marines move cautiously between twisted palms, rifles raised, helmets slick with sweat, each man listening for a sound that never comes. Then, a single shot. A Marine in the front rank drops instantly. No one sees where it came from. Every eye scans the tree line, the rocks, the holes in the coral. Nothing moves. The sniper is invisible. Another shot. Another man falls. The Marines hit the ground. They're pinned, not by machine guns, not by mortars, but by one unseen marksman. A corporal shouts the order. Flamethrower up. Two men crawl forward, dragging the M1 unit on their backs. The fuel tanks shimmer in the sun. They reach the front line. The nozzle rises. A hiss, then a roar, and fire erupts through the brush. The air turns to heat. The jungle screams. Smoke boils from the ridge. For a moment, the sniper war ends, not with a bullet, but with fire. The Pacific War was full of battles. But this was a hunt, and it changed how men fought and how they remembered killing. When the United States went to war against Japan in 1941, few in Washington, or even in the Marine Corps, understood what kind of war it would become. They expected naval battles, carrier duels, air raids. What they found instead was something far more personal, a war of inches fought in jungles, caves, and volcanic rock, where the enemy could vanish between heartbeats. From Guadalcanal to Tarawa, from Saipan to Peleliu, the Americans faced an army unlike any they had fought before. Japan's imperial troops were not only disciplined and determined, they had been trained for a form of warfare that mixed ancient Bushido spirit with modern precision. Among them, one group of soldiers stood apart. The snipers. Patient, invisible, and utterly merciless. Japanese snipers were not sharpshooters in the Western sense. They were hunters, trained to disappear for days without food, to let insects crawl across their faces without flinching, to wait in silence for one perfect shot. Their doctrine was born out of Imperial Army marksmanship schools in the 1930s and refined through the brutal Chinese campaigns. By the time Japan struck at Pearl Harbor, its sniper program had evolved into a small but lethal fraternity. Each sniper carried a Type 97 rifle, a modified scoped variant of the standard Arisaka Type 38, firing a 5mm round with little muzzle flash and nearly no smoke. The weapon's quietness made detection almost impossible. Their uniforms blended into the jungle. Their firing nests were dug into palm trunks, coral ridges, or the upper canopy of trees. Many built mock roots and false foliage over their positions. Others fired through hollow logs or narrow cracks in cave openings, so small that even close-range binoculars couldn't find them. One Marine on Guadalcanal later recalled, "You never saw the Jap who hit you. He was just the jungle itself." To the Americans, these snipers became a kind of ghost army. They rarely moved, they didn't retreat, they didn't surrender, they didn't shoot at random, only at officers, radio men, or medics. One well-placed sniper could paralyze an entire platoon. At first, the U.S. command underestimated the danger. Early Pacific operations were focused on artillery bombardment and frontal assaults, doctrines carried over from Europe. But the Pacific Islands weren't France or Italy. There were no open fields, no clear fronts, only heat, silence, and ambush. On Tarawa, Marines found snipers wired into bunkers so they could shoot until death without retreat. On Bougainville, they discovered soldiers tied to trees, snipers bound to their positions to ensure they could never flee. It was a psychological war as much as a physical one. Each shot in the jungle wasn't just a bullet, it was a message. You are never safe. By late 1943, American commanders realized that conventional firepower was failing. Artillery and mortars couldn't clear dense vegetation or reach snipers buried in caves. Rifle fire revealed positions and wasted ammunition. Grenades helped, but only at close range. The answer came from an old weapon given a terrifying new purpose: the flamethrower. Initially used in Europe during World War I, the flamethrower was considered brutal, impractical, and unstable. But in the Pacific, it became the perfect answer to the sniper problem. The US Marine Corps and Seabees began deploying small teams armed with M1 and later M2 flamethrowers, each capable of shooting a 70-foot stream of burning gasoline. Their job was not to engage in normal combat, it was to hunt. They worked in pairs, one with the flamethrower, one with a carbine or Thompson to cover reloads. Their task: clear every hole, cave, and ridge one by one. These specialized hunter-killer squads operated on the edges of the battlefield, moving behind advancing infantry. They followed the smell of cordite and the sound of single shots, the signature of snipers. They would crawl to within a few meters of suspected positions, spray flame into openings, and listen. If they heard screaming, the job was done. If not, they sprayed again. One Marine corporal later wrote, "You never looked them in the eye. You never saw them. The flame just did what you couldn't." Flamethrowers didn't just kill, they denied the enemy concealment. Every burst cleared vegetation, exposed sniper hides, and revealed bunkers invisible to the naked eye. For the first time, American troops could strike back against the ghosts, but it came at a cost. Carrying 70 pounds of pressurized fuel made flamethrower operators the most targeted men on the battlefield. Japanese snipers were ordered to kill them first, to keep their fire from spreading. Thus began a new and terrible duel: sniper versus flamethrower. Patience against fear, precision against heat. By the time the Marines reached Peleliu in September 1944, this confrontation had become a ritual of survival, one that defined the Pacific War's final years. By 1944, the Pacific had turned into a chain of death traps. Names like Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were about to become synonymous with slaughter. Each island was a fortress. Japan's Imperial Army had transformed coral ridges, limestone caves, and volcanic tunnels into labyrinths of interlocking defenses. Every position, every ridge, every palm tree could hide a sniper, and usually did. US commanders learned that firepower alone could not win. The jungle absorbed bullets, the rocks shrugged off artillery, and for every sniper nest destroyed, another opened up 50 yards away. On Peleliu, the Marines called it Sniper Island. On Iwo Jima, they called it the island that shot back. The Imperial Japanese Army believed that a dead sniper was more valuable than a living one. Each marksman was expected to kill as many Americans as possible, delay every advance, and die where he fought. Retreat was forbidden. Capture was disgrace. They were told, "Your body is a weapon. Use it until it burns." Many buried themselves in shallow caves with only the rifle barrel exposed through a slit in the rock. Others carved firing tunnels through volcanic stone, angling their barrels upward so muzzle flashes couldn't reveal them. They would fire one round, then wait, sometimes for hours, for the next. When American troops closed in, they didn't surrender. They stayed silent until another soldier exposed himself and another shot came. It wasn't warfare, it was predation, and it was working. During the campaigns of 1943 to 44, snipers caused up to 25% of Marine casualties in certain island battles. They killed radio men, medics, officers, anyone who carried responsibility. A single well-placed sniper could freeze entire platoons for hours, pinning them down until mortars or air support could be called. But worse than the losses were the psychological toll. You could fight a man you saw. You couldn't fight the jungle. You couldn't fight a tree that shot back. Morale dipped, units grew cautious, and caution, in a place like Peleliu, meant death. So American doctrine adapted, not through strategy, but through necessity. In 1943, the U.S. Marine Corps formally authorized the use of M1 flamethrower squads within its infantry battalions. By 1944, they had become indispensable. The M1 could project a stream of ignited gasoline nearly 70 feet, reaching into bunkers and holes that no grenade could touch. But it wasn't just range, it was effect. Flame consumed oxygen, filled tunnels with smoke, and flushed out snipers who refused to move. Even when it didn't kill, it forced a reaction, a cough, a movement, a shadow, that exposed the shooter's location. In this way, the flamethrower wasn't merely a weapon, it was a detector, a tool for seeing the unseen. Flamethrower units learned to work like counter-snipers. They would watch for movement, mark possible firing zones, and advance slowly under covering fire. When they reached a likely nest, one man sprayed the area while his partner covered him with rifle fire. The flame cleared the foliage. The flame revealed the ghosts. And in that instant, the hunt reversed. By mid-1944, the U.S. had begun training specialized fire teams, small three-man squads built around a single flamethrower operator. Their job was singular: eliminate snipers and close defenses at point-blank range. These men carried more weight than anyone else on the battlefield. Their fuel tanks made them slow targets, their presence marked by a faint metallic rattle and the smell of fuel. Japanese snipers were trained to target them first, the flame bearers, the men who brought hell with them. But despite horrific casualty rates, these Marines kept going. Each foot of ground taken in the Pacific was bought with their sweat, fear, and often their lives. They became the most hunted men on the island, and the most feared. One flamethrower operator on Peleliu later said, "The first time you use it, you feel sick. The second time, you feel nothing. The third time, you understand why it has to be done." By the time the Marines landed on Peleliu in September 1944, sniper flamethrower duels had become almost ritualistic. Japanese snipers knew the flamethrowers were coming, and they waited for them, baiting squads with single shots and traps. Flamethrower teams, in turn, advanced behind riflemen, sweeping ridges and trenches in slow arcs of fire. Entire sections of jungle would ignite in seconds, the flames crawling across leaves and into bunkers where snipers hid. For every sniper killed by fire, another took his place. But gradually, the balance began to shift. The Americans were learning, adapting, hardening. The flame became part of their identity, part of their survival. They no longer feared the hidden shot, they feared the silence before it. And soon, they would carry that silence onto the most brutal battleground yet, Peleliu, where the jungle would burn, and where America's flamethrower hunters would meet Japan's best snipers in a fight neither side would ever forget. The Pacific jungles didn't just test soldiers' strength, they tested their sanity. For the American infantryman, the sniper was an invisible god, striking at random, judging without mercy. Every sound could be death. Every coconut tree could hide an eye. Men learned not to stand, not to speak loudly, not to glance too long at the horizon. Even lighting a cigarette could mean a bullet through the skull. Some platoons joked darkly that the jungle had snipers in its roots. Others stopped joking entirely. But for flamethrower operators, fear was something else. It wasn't the suddenness of death. It was the certainty of being the target. A flamethrower operator's silhouette was unmistakable. Twin fuel tanks on the back, a heavy nozzle over the shoulder, and a faint metallic hiss that betrayed their presence even before the flame erupted. Every Japanese sniper on an island knew what that sound meant. The man carrying it was the executioner, and killing him was a duty of honor. The Marines carrying those tanks knew it too. They walked anyway. One survivor of Iwo Jima later said, "When you strap on those tanks, you stop thinking about fear. You're already dead. You just hope you do your job before it catches up." The flamethrower was both a weapon and a punishment. It weighed nearly 70 pounds when full, and the fuel tanks turned into a furnace under the island sun. The pressure lines leaked, the igniters jammed, and the operators carried only seconds of flame, bursts of life and death, fired in waves that lasted barely 6 or 7 seconds at a time. To use it, a man had to crawl within 30 yards of the enemy, close enough to hear breathing inside the bunkers, close enough to smell the oil on a sniper's rifle. When the trigger was pressed, the effect was absolute. The jet of fire could reach 65 to 70 feet, igniting everything it touched: palm fronds, ammunition, bodies, and air itself. In the confined tunnels and pillboxes of the Pacific Islands, the result was beyond comprehension. The pressure of the flame wave could kill through concussion before the heat arrived. And yet the Marines learned to operate with mechanical precision. Spray. Pause. Listen. Move. Repeat. Every flame burst cleared ground that would have taken hours of small arms fire. Every mission brought them closer to surviving another day. But survival came at a cost. Many flamethrower operators confessed after the war that they felt haunted, not by fear, but by memory. "You didn't see them die," one Marine said, "but you heard it." And that was worse. For the Japanese sniper, the war was personal long before the Americans landed. These men had been chosen for calm nerves, perfect eyesight, and total obedience. Their training began in forests outside Kyoto and continued in the mountains of Formosa. They were taught to blend, to endure, and above all, to die unseen. Snipers were told their deaths would serve the emperor more than survival ever could. Each was expected to kill 10 enemies before falling, and to die in place rather than retreat. Many carried no food beyond 2 days' rations. Some tied themselves to trees or rocks. Others sealed their bunkers with sandbags after entering, ensuring there would be no exit. They were armed with simple, reliable tools: the Type 97 sniper rifle, firing 6.5mm rounds with minimal recoil and flash. The small caliber lacked power against cover, but it was perfect for the sniper's art: silence and endurance. They rarely fired more than once per hour. Some waited entire days for a single clear target. The Japanese sniper was not trying to win the battle. He was trying to make every advance hurt. When American soldiers found their positions later, they discovered notes, diaries, and drawings. One line, recovered from a dead sniper on Guam, read, "I will not live to see Japan's victory. But if one more American fall, my spirit remains on this island." The sniper and the flamethrower operator represented two opposite philosophies of war. The sniper believed in patience through stillness, waiting for the enemy to come to him. The flamethrower believed in patience through motion, inching forward, waiting for a flicker of movement to justify the burst of fire. Both required courage, discipline, and a level of detachment most soldiers could never understand. Both fought in isolation, surrounded by silence and death. And both, in their own ways, were marked for death from the start. If the sniper was captured, he would be executed, often without trial. If the flamethrower was hit, his tanks would explode, consuming him instantly. It was a duel fought not for victory, but for endurance, a war where the most patient man won, and the loser vanished into the fire or the leaves. The jungles of the Pacific became a graveyard for both. But at Peleliu and Iwo Jima, that duel reached its peak, when the best snipers Japan ever trained met the most determined flamethrower teams America ever fielded. What followed wasn't battle, it was extermination, one bunker at a time. By late 1944, the Pacific battlefield had become an experiment in survival. Every island brought new tactics, new weapons, new horrors. The Japanese sniper, once an ambusher, had now become a static component of a larger defensive machine, integrated into cave networks, connected through tunnels, covering interlocking kill zones. Each sniper was no longer just a lone hunter, he was part of a living fortress. On Peleliu, the coral ridges were honeycombed with firing holes only inches wide. Snipers coordinated with machine gun nests, firing in perfect rhythm, one shot to draw attention, the next to kill whoever responded. At times, entire marine companies were held at bay by a single position that could not be bombed, shelled, or approached. The snipers were no longer fighting for ground. They were fighting to delay time itself, to make every foot of advance cost lives. Conventional infantry tactics failed. Bayonet charges achieved nothing. Artillery fire rolled overhead and vanished into rock. That's when the flamethrower teams came. The Americans adapted their approach with almost surgical precision. Flamethrower operators worked in 3-man assault units. One carried the flamethrower, one carried a carbine or BAR for protection, and one carried extra fuel tanks. Engineers and Seabees followed close behind with explosives and bulldozers, sealing caves after they were cleared. The process was methodical. 1. Identify sniper or firing point, often by observing the trajectory of a single shot. 2. Suppress the area with small arms fire. 3. Advance the flamethrower to within 20 to 30 yards. 4. Ignite and sweep the target zone in 3-second bursts. 5. Seal the entrance with explosives or dirt. It was brutal, efficient, repetitive, a system of industrialized killing on a microscale. For the first time, the US military was practicing what it called progressive neutralization, the elimination of resistance one cell at a time, no longer measured by yards or hours, but by caves cleared. At Iwo Jima, over 800 separate cave systems were destroyed this way. Most of the defenders inside were snipers or riflemen supporting them. Few surrendered. None escaped. Soldiers who fought there said that the sound of battle changed. The Pacific Front no longer echoed with machine gun fire or artillery. It hissed. It roared. The flamethrower became the dominant sound of conquest. A low metallic hiss, then a burst of thunder, followed by the crackle of fire and the muffled screams within stone. Snipers who survived initial burns often chose suicide rather than capture. The flame didn't just destroy them, it denied them their code of death. One Marine officer observed grimly, "We found rifles welded to rock by heat." No bodies, just outlines. For American troops, the fire wasn't only a weapon, it was psychological armor. Each burst of flame was a cleansing, a momentary relief from fear. They didn't have to see the enemy anymore, they could erase him. But in that relief came something darker. The flame stripped away the last illusion of distance. War became personal again, face to face, through smoke and screams. By 1945, many veterans described the sniper war as the most intimate kind of killing. You weren't firing at a formation or dropping a bomb from the sky. You were aiming at an unseen person who might be 5 yards away, someone patient, disciplined, and waiting to kill you first. And when you found him, you didn't pull a trigger, you lit him on fire. The result was devastating to both sides. Flamethrower operators were often ostracized even by their own units. Some infantrymen refused to eat near them, believing they carried death in their smell, gasoline, smoke, and something else. They were called torchmen. Silent, focused, and haunted. One Marine remembered a flamethrower operator named Harris, who never spoke above a whisper after Peleliu. He burned 50 men alive that week. After that, he never looked anyone in the eye again. Psychologists studying post-war trauma would later cite flamethrower units as among the most psychologically scarred veterans of the Pacific. They had done what others couldn't, and what others couldn't bear to imagine. The Japanese snipers, too, endured the collapse of everything they were trained to believe in. By Iwo Jima, the Imperial Army's Sniper Corps had ceased to exist as a coordinated force. Those who remained fought in isolation, half-starved, trapped in caves filled with the bodies of their comrades. Even so, they continued to fire until the end. A single shot every few hours, a last act of defiance in a war already lost. When US forces recovered Japanese diaries after the battle, they found entries like, The flames reach our holes. My rifle is too hot to touch. I will not scream. I will not leave. I will burn as a soldier. For many, that was the end. Fire did what bullets could not. It erased both fear and identity. The sniper and the flamethrower embodied the two extremes of human warfare, precision and annihilation. One killed by focus, the other by obliteration. Both were efficient. Both were necessary. Neither left survivors. And as the war moved toward its final battles on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the balance tilted irrevocably. The flamethrower no longer hunted, it cleansed. The sniper no longer fought, he endured. The jungle had burned, the ghosts had faded. But what remained inside the men who survived would haunt them for decades. The climax of that confrontation, the moment where patience met fire, came on the ridges of Peleliu and in the tunnels of Iwo Jima, where every foot of ground was bought with flame, smoke, and silence. Peleliu, September 15, 1944. The sea boiled with landing craft, the horizon burned with smoke, and in front of the U.S. 1st Marine Division rose a small, jagged island, Peleliu, 6 miles long, covered in coral ridges and tangled jungle. Intelligence predicted a 3-day battle. It would last 73 days. When the Marines hit the beach, they expected the usual: machine gun fire, artillery, mortars. But the opening minutes were eerily quiet. Men sprinted across sand, dug in behind shattered coral, and waited for the counterattack. It didn't come. Then, one by one, Marines began to fall. Single shots, precise, distant, unseen. Snipers. They were everywhere, hidden in the ridges, buried in coral holes, disguised as dead bodies, even perched in palm trees stripped of leaves. Every step forward drew another shot. Every movement drew blood. The Marines realized within hours that Peleliu wasn't defended. It was possessed. The heart of the island was the Uma Brogel Pocket, a maze of coral ridges and caves stretching for nearly a mile. It was here that Japan's 14th Infantry Division, led by Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, had dug in. Nakagawa had abandoned the old banzai suicide charges. Instead, he built a defense designed to kill as many Americans as possible while costing as few Japanese lives as necessary. Snipers were placed at the entrances of every cave. Behind them, machine gunners and mortarmen waited in layered depth. Each ridge was its own fortress, and every fortress covered the next. Flamethrowers and demolitions were the only way forward. By the third day, conventional tactics had failed. Infantry couldn't advance more than 50 yards without being pinned. The Marines called forward the flamethrower operators and demolition engineers. These men, often working in pairs, began the slow, deliberate process of clearing Peleliu ridge by ridge. Each operation was the same. They crawled to within 20 meters of a sniper's hole. The rifleman laid down suppressive fire. The flamethrower hissed, and then, a roar of orange and black, the sound of air being turned to fire. In seconds, the cave would erupt like a furnace. Smoke, heat, and debris poured out. If anything moved afterward, the Marines sealed the opening with TNT. Then they moved to the next one. On some days, a single platoon destroyed 40 to 50 caves this way. For the men inside those caves, the end came without warning. The Japanese snipers and gunners had nowhere to go. The fire consumed oxygen first, suffocating before it burned. Many didn't scream. They simply never emerged again. A Marine private remembered clearing one ridge where every bunker was connected by tunnels. You'd burn one hole and smoke would come out of 10 others. We didn't know if we'd killed them or not. We just kept burning. The fire erased the line between soldier and target. Flamethrower operators began to work by reflex, firing, listening, sealing, moving. They couldn't afford pity. They couldn't afford hesitation. Peleliu turned them into machines. By the time the Uma Brogel Pocket was cleared, 1,300 Japanese defenders had been killed inside an area smaller than a football field. Many were found with rifles still clutched in their hands, fused by heat. The Marines lost over 1,200 men taking those ridges, nearly one for every Japanese killed. Even success had a cost. The smell of burning coral and flesh clung to their uniforms. The heat turned their canteens warm. Flies covered everything that moved. One Marine captain wrote in his diary, "The only thing that moved on Peleliu was the fire. Everything else was dead as the battle dragged on. Surviving Japanese snipers became desperate. They moved at night, repositioning between caves, climbing into trees to fire at silhouettes in moonlight. In response, the Marines adopted counter-sniper fire by flame. They no longer searched for movement. They burned the trees, the ridges, the roots, anything that could hide a man. By the end of October, there were no more snipers, only ash. Peleliu became the blueprint for the remainder of the Pacific campaign. It taught the US that Japan's new defensive strategy could only be broken through close-range annihilation, flame, demolition, and persistence. It also taught Japan that death by fire was inevitable, and that the sniper's age of invisibility was over. For the Americans, it was victory. For the Japanese, it was extinction. But beneath that victory was something darker, a sense that this war had stripped both sides of humanity. By the time the Marines left Peleliu, they no longer feared the jungle or the sniper's bullet. They feared what they had become. The next island, Iwo Jima, would be worse. The snipers would be more skilled, the tunnels deeper, the fire hotter. And for every Marine who survived Peleliu, Iwo Jima would be the final test of what a man could endure before the war consumed him completely. Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945. Before dawn, the Pacific horizon glowed red, not from sunrise but from bombardment. For 3 days, US Navy battleships had shelled the small volcanic island called Iwo Jima. 21,000 Japanese soldiers were thought to be buried somewhere beneath its black sand. When the shelling stopped, silence returned. Then the Marines landed. Within minutes, they realized the shelling had done almost nothing. There were no visible defenses, no gunfire, just wind and volcanic ash. Then the island erupted. Machine guns opened from invisible slits. Mortars rained down. Snipers fired single, surgical shots. By noon, the beaches were covered in bodies. Iwo Jima was different from any other battlefield on Earth. Unlike the jungles of Peleliu or Guadalcanal, it was bare, black volcanic sand, jagged rock, and sulfur vents. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had turned the entire island into a fortress. He ordered no banzai charges, no suicidal waves. Instead, his men, especially the snipers, would fight from underground, from a network of more than 11 miles of tunnels, linking over 1,500 bunkers and firing points. Snipers were positioned at the mouths of those tunnels, overlapping fields of fire with near mathematical precision. Their goal wasn't to repel the Americans, it was to bleed them. Every bullet was meant to buy one more minute for Japan. Every life, one more delay before invasion reached the homeland. The US Marines who landed on Iwo Jima found themselves trapped in an open graveyard. The volcanic ash swallowed their boots. Bullets whined invisibly from the hills. Every advance was measured in feet, every casualty retrieved under fire. The phrase, "secure the beach," lost its meaning. There was no safe ground. Snipers waited in caves carved into Mount Suribachi, the island's southern volcano, firing through pencil-thin cracks that revealed nothing. Marines learned that if you saw the flash, it was already too late. By the second day, flamethrower teams were moving forward under withering fire, crawling over open terrain, their fuel tanks gleaming in the sun. Many never made it 10 yards, but those who did turned the island into a furnace. The Marines of the 28th Regiment began their climb up Mount Suribachi on February 21st. Every cave, every ledge, every hollow held a sniper or machine gunner. The flamethrower teams went first. Behind them came demolition men with satchel charges. Behind them, bulldozers to seal whatever survived. It was a terrible, methodical rhythm. Spray, burn, collapse, move on. For the first time, tanks equipped with flamethrowers, the M4A 3R3 Zippo Shermans, joined the fight. Their nozzles could throw fire nearly 150 feet, clearing entire cave systems without infantry support. Japanese snipers tried to pick them off, but the tank's thick armor deflected their small-caliber rounds. For every sniper that died, 10 more fired from the darkness. But the Marines didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. After 4 days of burning, blasting, and sealing, the top of Suribachi was reached. There, amid the smoke and sulfur, the Marines raised their flag, a symbol the world would never forget. But the killing below hadn't stopped. The snipers still fired. Below Suribachi, the fight raged on. Every ridge, every depression on the island concealed hidden sniper nests. The Japanese fired from tunnels so deep that their muzzle flashes were invisible, the sound echoing like ghosts through the rock. The only way to eliminate them was to send in flamethrowers or fill the tunnels with explosives. U.S. records from the 5th Marine Division describe flamethrower operators making more than 1,300 assaults on caves and bunkers during the 36-day battle. Most targets were cleared without a single shot fired back. The defenders simply vanished, either burned or buried alive. One Marine lieutenant later said, "We weren't fighting soldiers anymore. We were fighting shadows and echoes, and the only way to silence them was fire." By March, Kuribayashi's forces were almost gone, but the snipers kept fighting. In the final weeks, isolated Japanese marksmen crawled out of collapsed tunnels to fire single shots at dusk, then waited to die. Some covered their rifles in rags to muffle the sound, others climbed out at night to snipe at silhouettes against the moonlit sand. They had no water, no food, no orders, only purpose. One diary recovered after the battle contained a final entry. "The fire has taken my brothers. But I remain. Each bullet I fire is one moment longer that Japan still breathes." The next day's patrol found his rifle melted into stone. When the battle finally ended in March 1945, nearly 21,000 Japanese soldiers were dead. Only 216 were captured alive. Most had died by flame, collapse, or suicide. The U.S. lost over 26,000 men, 1/3 of the entire Marine force committed. Historians would later call Iwo Jima the most concentrated killing field in U.S. Marine Corps history. But for those who fought there, it was simpler. Iwo Jima was a world without mercy, where patience met fire, and only one side walked out. The sniper and the flamethrower, the two deadliest individuals in the Pacific War, had reached their endgame. Neither could evolve further. Both had reached the limits of what man could endure, both physically and morally. The snipers of Japan had become martyrs to a dying empire. The flamethrower men of America had become ghosts who walked in daylight, scarred, respected, and silently broken. By the time the fires on Iwo Jima died, the duel was over, and soon the war itself would follow. But the fire, and the memory of what it did, would never fade. When the smoke cleared over Iwo Jima, nothing living remained. The ridges that had once crawled with rifle fire were now black and silent. The caves that had once echoed with Japanese commands were sealed under tons of rock. For weeks after the battle, Marines still heard distant explosions, tunnels collapsing as leftover grenades ignited trapped fuel. The island itself was burning from the inside, its volcanic veins glowing red beneath the crust. And in that silence, both armies had changed forever. The Imperial Japanese Army entered the Pacific War with one of the most disciplined sniper programs in the world. It ended on Iwo Jima. By 1945, the doctrine of the solitary marksman, patient, invisible, almost spiritual, had met the industrial reality of modern warfare. You could hide from bullets, but not from fire. Snipers could wait for hours, hold their breath, disappear into stone. But the flamethrower didn't need to find them. It simply reached into every hole and erased them. Out of an estimated 1,000 trained snipers deployed across the Central Pacific, fewer than 100 survived by the end of 1945. Most perished in the tunnels of the Marianas and the volcano islands. Those who lived long enough to see the homeland again carried wounds they could never describe. Some wrote of the flame demons, others simply stopped writing altogether. Their tradition, centuries of marksmanship rooted in bushido and precision, vanished with them. For the Americans, the Pacific Campaign was a tactical success, but a moral wound. The flamethrower, which began as a desperate solution, became a standard weapon of the Marine Corps, and one of its most feared. In Peleliu alone, over 10,000 gallons of napalm fuel were expended in a single month. On Iwo Jima, the number tripled. The official reports recorded cave neutralizations, not deaths, but each cave meant lives ended without faces or names. When those same operators returned home, they carried nightmares that had no language. Flamethrower operators rarely spoke of their work. When they did, it was with a distant calm, the kind that hides more than it reveals. Private First Class Robert Maguire of the 1st Marine Division described it bluntly. You didn't aim at people. You aimed at holes, and you tried not to think about what was inside. Another veteran recalled how he'd dream of tunnels filled with smoke, always hearing breathing, never finding the source. Many suffered severe burns from their own equipment as Japanese snipers targeted their tanks. Others were killed instantly when a single bullet turned their fuel into an inferno. By 1946, U.S. medical records listed flamethrower crews among the highest cases of combat fatigue and delayed trauma. Psychologists called it moral shock, the inability to reconcile duty with memory. They had survived hell only to live inside it. For Japan, the sniper was more than a soldier. He was a symbol of honor and patience. But after Iwo Jima, even the Empire stopped celebrating him. The official wartime bulletins stopped listing sniper units by name. Manuals ceased production. The very idea of the solitary warrior no longer fit a war now fought with bombs and firestorms. By August 1945, the last remnants of Japan's sniper school near Nara had been destroyed by Allied air raids. Its instructors and students perished alongside their traditions. In the ruins, Allied investigators later found burned logbooks, half-written lessons on patience, camouflage, and breathing control. The ink had melted into the pages, unreadable. It was as if the art itself had burned away. Meanwhile, the flamethrower operators, the men once feared by both sides, quietly disappeared back into American life. Most didn't talk about their service. When they attended reunions, they stood apart, often silent. The public celebrated the pilots, the tankers, the infantrymen. But few wanted to remember the men who turned oxygen into death. Their weapon had saved thousands of lives, but it had also taken thousands more in ways too close to describe. One Marine veteran said decades later, "I fought snipers, not men." That's what I told myself. But you can only lie for so long. By war's end, the Pacific Campaign had killed over 100,000 Japanese soldiers through fire-based tactics. Flamethrowers, napalm, and phosphorus combined. Snipers, who once ruled the battlefield with silence, became the hunted species, destroyed in ways even they could not imagine. The official reports listed numbers. The men remembered faces, or rather, the lack of them. It wasn't a war of victory anymore. It was a war of subtraction. Every hill cleared meant one less place for a human being to exist. And when it was over, even the victors weren't sure what they had won. The Pacific War had one more chapter, Okinawa, where both fire and sniper rifles would return in their final desperate forms. But after Peleliu and Iwo Jima, something fundamental had already ended. The sniper's art had died in the smoke. And the flamethrower men had learned what victory cost when you burn everything in your path. April 1st, 1945. Easter Sunday. As U.S. Marines and Army divisions waded ashore on Okinawa, they thought they had learned everything about Japan's defenses. Caves, snipers, tunnels, ambushes. But Okinawa would prove even deadlier. It was the largest amphibious invasion of the Pacific War, over 180,000 American troops against 120,000 Japanese defenders, many of them veterans of Iwo Jima and the Philippines. And within its limestone hills and terraced ridges, Japanese snipers once again waited, patient, unseen, and resigned to die. The Americans brought everything: tanks, aircraft, napalm, flamethrowers. The tactics born in Peleliu and perfected on Iwo Jima were now the standard. But this time, the defenders were no longer fighting for islands, they were fighting for Japan itself. On Okinawa, the sniper once again became a phantom. They hid in tombs, schoolhouses, and civilian buildings, often surrounded by terrified locals. They fired sparingly, forcing Americans to commit entire platoons to hunt a single rifle. The Marines responded the only way they knew how: fire first, search later. Flamethrowers swept through villages. The M4A3 Zippo tanks rolled forward, their nozzles spitting napalm into caves and trenches. The fire didn't distinguish between soldier or civilian, only between movement and stillness. Within days, Okinawa began to burn. The battle raged for 82 days. By the time it ended, over 12,000 Americans and nearly 100,000 Japanese soldiers were dead. But what shocked the world most was not the military toll. It was the civilian tragedy. Tens of thousands of Okinawan civilians, caught between sniper fire and flame, perished in the inferno. Villages turned into fire pits. Caves filled with entire families. Witnesses described the hills glowing at night from within. The same weapons that had once been hailed as tactical miracles now revealed their full horror. Victory and atrocity had become indistinguishable. When the war finally ended in August 1945, and Japan surrendered after the atomic bombings, the U.S. military began quietly retiring the flamethrower. Publicly, it was deemed obsolete. Privately, generals and scientists alike admitted that the weapon had done too much. The flamethrower had achieved its purpose, to cleanse the islands, but it had also stripped war of humanity. Its images couldn't be shown to the public. Its stories were too horrifying for newspapers. In official histories, the flamethrower was described only in terms of effectiveness, a weapon for confined spaces, ideal for cave clearance. But those who used it never forgot the screams. Meanwhile, Japan's surviving snipers, the few who returned from the islands or the homeland defense units, found no place in the new Japan. Their discipline, once revered, now belonged to a dead empire. They were relics of a code that had burned itself out. Some became farmers, others vanished into the countryside. A handful taught marksmanship quietly, without mentioning what they had been. One former sniper, interviewed in 1957, said, "I never fired again. The rifle was not defeated. The man behind it was—" The sniper's silence became Japan's silence, an unspoken mourning for a generation that had vanished into the earth. In the post-war years, both nations faced difficult questions. What had the Pacific War revealed about humanity? For Japan, it was the futility of absolute obedience, men who fought to the death for an emperor who would later stand silent. For America, it was the cost of total war, victory achieved not through precision, but through annihilation. The flamethrower symbolized that shift. It wasn't a tool of combat anymore. It was a philosophy that survival justified everything, even fire. Historians would later call this the psychological turning point of modern warfare, when the enemy stopped being a soldier and became simply a target to be erased. By 1946, the U.S. military began phasing out man-portable flamethrowers. By Korea, only a few remained. By Vietnam, their use was condemned by the same international laws they had once inspired. The weapon that once defined survival was now viewed as a symbol of barbarity. Yet in museums and archives, blackened flamethrower tanks still sit in glass cases, reminders of the men who carried them through hell. Beside them, in other displays, lie Japanese rifles. Arisaka Type 97s, their scopes clouded, their barrels bent by heat. Two tools, once wielded by the most patient and the most ruthless, both destroyed by a war that demanded nothing less than total submission from everyone it touched. After Okinawa, there were no more islands left to burn, no more ridges left to defend. Only ruins, ashes, and silence. The jungle that had once echoed with single gunshots and the roar of flame grew quiet again. Vines crept over bunkers. The caves cooled. The wind carried the smell of earth, not smoke. But in the memory of those who fought there, the sound of that duel, the crack of a sniper's rifle, the roar of a flamethrower, never left. Both sides had hunted each other to extinction. Neither truly won. Only the fire survived, for a time, in the stories they told their children, and in the nightmares they never could. In the end, the Pacific War was not just a clash of armies or nations. It was a collision between two ideas of courage. One side believed in stillness, the courage to wait, to hold one's breath, to become invisible in service of duty. The other believed in motion, the courage to advance through fear, to face death head-on, carrying 70 pounds of flame. The Japanese sniper and the American flamethrower were opposites in every sense. One killed through silence, the other through sound. One believed in precision, the other in obliteration. And yet both lived and died by the same truth. That fear could be mastered, but never escaped. The Pacific taught humanity something that no victory parade could erase, that progress and brutality often walk hand in hand. The same science that built airplanes and radios also built weapons that turned oxygen into fire. The same discipline that taught a soldier to control his breath also taught him to die without one. When historians later spoke of innovation, they meant radar, carriers, atomic power. But there was another kind, the innovation of necessity, when men, trapped in a nightmare, invented new ways to survive, no matter the cost to their souls. The sniper's rifle and the flamethrower's roar were not enemies. They were reflections, mirrors held up to the same human instinct, to live, even when living required unthinkable acts. Today the caves of Peleliu and the sands of Iwo Jima lie quiet. Wind whistles through the same cracks where snipers once watched. Coral ridges, once scorched by flame, now bloom with grass. Time has reclaimed what fire could not. And yet, if you walk those places in silence, you can almost hear it. The faint hum of flame, the distant echo of a single rifle shot. The memory of men who hunted and hid, fought and burned, died and vanished, each believing he was serving something greater. The story of Japan's snipers and America's flamethrower units isn't about victory or defeat. It's about what survival demands. It asks a question that has haunted every war since. When the mission is to win at any cost, what part of our humanity do we lose along the way? On Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, that answer burned itself into history, written not in ink, but in smoke. Because in the Pacific, victory didn't come from who shot faster or who burned brighter. It came from who endured longest, in body, in will, and in silence.